Welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast with Mukunda Raghavan.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast. This is Mukunda Raghavan. Today I'm joined by Ashish Kulkarni. He is an MBA and an engineer who has, over the past 5-6 years, delved deeply into genetics and basically try to test the assumptions and the data presented by I would say the Indo-European environment of genetic data sampling, ancient DNA, and then kind of in conjunction with that, archaeology and not paleontology, but anthropology and linguistics that connects the trying to trace where the Indo-Europeans or Indo-Aryans came from, moved around to. So there's a lot of interesting places this is going right now in the world. Welcome to the podcast, Ashish. How are you?
Namaskar. Thank you so much, Mukunda, for having me. So let's chat. There's some very interesting stuff happening in this field. It's picked up only in the past 10 years or so, 10, 12 years. And what I like about this field is that these people who are at the forefront, actually, they're using tools and making their samples and everything public. So actually, anyone can test them, recreate their own steps that they have published in their papers, and figure out what they are concluding, why they are concluding so. And so that's what I attempted to do, because I was interested in this question, like many Indians are.
Sure.
And not just Indians, but many people around the world are interested to know why there are similarities in the languages of all these varied people across the world. So.
Right. No, I think it's totally fascinating. I mean, but it's very interesting. I mean, your background, the fact that engineering makes sense because engineering at some level is connected to the genomic engineering that people do, or data extraction. There's a process that I'm sure people learn how to think process oriented, methodologically. You also have an MBA, but what drew you first to the genetics industry, the field? I mean, because this is not not significant time you spend. You spend quite a bit of time on going through the data and retesting the samples and doing all that. So what drew you to this? Like, I mean, I'm guessing you're 28, 29?
No, I'm 35.
Okay, well, I'm wrong then. Okay, so tell me, what drew you to this in the past 6 years or 7 years?
So I finished my engineering from NIT Surathkal, which is in Karnataka. So I graduated in 2008, and immediately I got admitted into IIM Calcutta. So I graduated from there in 2010. After that, I worked in Mumbai as a trader for an investment bank for 5-6 years. And then I moved back to my hometown with my family, started my own business, and I have some free time, basically, which Mumbai was a lot more hectic.
Sure.
And in this, so what drew me into this subject was I used to be on social media. Now I'm only on Twitter, but I used to be on other social media, and I used to look at people talking about this subject. And then there were other bloggers from Europe, who were very active in this space, because Europe is the most most highly sampled area in the world in terms of genetics, ancient DNA as modern people, and so they were driving the theories essentially, and they were basically driving it with regards to India as
well, right?
In a historically consistent pattern.
That's right.
So I figured out, why not? It's a new field anyway, and I like to get into data. So even when I was a trader, I like the numbers. I like to get into the nitty-gritty of the data. So the first thing, for example, when any paper comes out, is I just look at the Excel supplements of that.
Sure.
Rather than the paper abstract and headline itself, because that hides a lot of things. The true magical stuff is in the details, in the supplements, and 200-page supplements and the Excel attachments provided.
Right.
Because they only present the finding which they most favor, but they would have tested 20 models, right? So I needed I need to check which 20 they have tested, what they have left out, stuff like that. Go through it bit
But
by bit.
and your MBA, I'm sure you gave you a lot of expertise in your in the Excel macros and all
So
that stuff.
Excel is life, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you decided to backtest and do all these tests with these, but like, what was so interesting about the genetics, like that really? I mean, because this is not like, again, this is not insignificant amount of work. This is like, to learn genetics, to learn what these R1A1 or all these different genetic markers
So the
mean.
first 2 years, I just observed and read. So for the first 2 years of this, I didn't. I just read everything voraciously, even the supplements and everything. But I didn't get down to the business immediately, right? I took a good amount of time to figure out the whole landscape of in a very global scale. What's happening in South America in 10,000 BC, for example. What's happening in Australia in 15,000 BC, or what happened in 7,000 BC Europe. So after 2 years, all this information of the papers published was at the back of my hand. Right. So once you understand the broader, you even start recognizing, label names of the samples. So when they sample some DNA from some ancient skeleton, in the record, they put it as some sample ID, say I1043. And then they'll have a label name, Spain _ Chalcolithic _ some name of the site. So all this information, basically, when you read it voraciously, you start remembering all of it. And then you as an analyst, anyone can then start putting things together, right? So if, for example, the technicality is one aspect. Once, suppose some technician tells you that this sample is 100% an admixture of these two samples, then you don't need a genetics background to understand what's happening, right?
Yeah, I would imagine, right? I mean, unless you want to go deeper into those samples, right?
No, so for example, if some technician, say Dr. David Reich, says that I am telling you with 100% certainty that this Chalcolithic sample from 3000 BCE, there are admixture between this French sample from 4000 BC and some English sample from 4000 BC. If he's right, and then he's also telling you, for example, that there are 20 samples and all of those samples are like this.
Okay.
So what you're inferring is that there's inflow from France and England into Spain, right?
Right.
At some point before 3000 BC. Now from here, you need to connect it to archaeology and whatever the linguistic science says about that specific site.
Sure.
And then you can figure out some things, and you can start speaking about what may have happened. So the technical aspect of it to figure out the models which are the best suiting is one part of it, and then analyzing that data is the job of any analyst, of any field. If you're good at your job in connecting, using logic and connecting data points, then you can do that, right?
Yeah.
So of course you need to have the backing of linguistics and archaeology and all that as well.
Okay.
For that you just have to read.
So when you started this, were you on any particular camp? Were you AIT, OIT, Aryan migration, or were you agnostic to it all?
I was sort of agnostic to it. I was of the opinion initially that I was initially of the opinion that IVC would have spoken something, and I wanted to figure out what they spoke.
Okay.
So I figured that I know no other language from that region, so probably Sanskrit was it. So you could say that I was on the camp that IVC most likely was Sanskrit. This was before I had read too much on this subject. So
okay.
So you could say that was my initial those were my initial thoughts on the subject.
Right.
And I went from there, figuring out if that was true or not.
And then now are you in a different camp?
I am in the camp that IVC probably did speak an Indo-European language around 2000 BC, but I am not really convinced that the origin of the languages is in India.
Right, right. Well, I think that's fair, because I mean, I think the data is 1 second here. sorry, let me just pause. Sorry. No. So now you're of the opinion that the IVC spoke some sort of Indo-European language. We don't maybe know exactly if it was Sanskrit or Proto-Sanskrit or daughter of Sanskrit, but it was something connected, right?
Yeah.
So what leads you to that position?
So let's start with how languages spread, basically.
Sure. Let's do that.
So that's, I think, the best way to understand logically, and then go from there. So there are so the most logical way is that a lot of people migrate from one place to the other and take their language with them, and that region over time, when they sort of gain an advantage over when they gain an advantage over the native population and come in power, then there's possibility that their language survives for long. That's one. The other that they say is something like an elite dominance scenario, in which only some elites rule the colony, and over time the language of the elites is adopted.
Like we could say in India and colonialism for British.
Yeah, you can say this happened. Actually, there are very few examples of this happening.
Yeah, I mean the British is one of them for sure, right? In India, because a small group of elites came to India and.
No, you can't say that. In India, the primary English speakers are very less. I think maybe even just 2-3% have English as their primary language.
No, but there's so much information being produced in English. I would imagine if in 1,000 years from now the civilization's gone for some reason, the English parts will survive. There's words in Hindi and Tamil and that we now use English instead, right?
That's true, but that still doesn't qualify as as language change of the people.
So you're talking about a total like conversion of the language, right? So we could say, like, for example, Mexico would be an example of the Spanish coming in.
Yeah, but that too is not really an elite dominance scenario. I'll explain it why. Because there was a large-scale decimation of the populations of the Native Americans.
Right.
So this is written about by Paul Hegarty of Max Planck. He has a good paper on this. And then there are a few papers on this as well. So what happened was a lot of Native Americans died, and in the places due to diseases which were brought by the Europeans.
Okay.
And in the places where, and we can see this from the ancestry. For example, the ancestry of Brazilians, etc., is like 80-90% European.
Yeah.
Only 10-20% of it is native. So large scale destruction of the population, native population. But in the places where there's a large chunk of Native American ancestry surviving, for example, Peru or some Mexican tribes, they still speak their Native American language.
Right. Okay.
Right. So there's another aspect to language change. The larger the inflow of people. So, for example, if 80 people come into a town of 20 people, then most likely the language of the 80 people will survive.
Yes.
But if 30 come and 70 are there already, then it's not sure if the 30 will be able to impose their language. So at the margins, so in the middle, it becomes a question of socio-politics essentially. It doesn't remain a question about genetics.
Okay.
But at the extremes, you can be fairly certain what would have happened. So, if for example, if there's 90% population turnover, then you can probably say that the incoming people change the language. And if there's hardly any population turnover, then you can probably say that there was no language change. Usually, this example explains most of the occurrences in prehistory, except a few exceptions. And there's only one exception that I can see right now is the Hungarian language. So Hungarians are modern Hungarians are genetically very similar to the neighbors who are Indo-Europeans, but they speak a language from a Uralic language family. Finno-Ugric, it's the language family, whereas the neighbors are Indo-Europeans.
Right.
So this has to be explained, right? So how did this happen? So it turns out that there were the Magyar people, who were conquerors from the east of Hungary, from the Siberian regions. So they started conquering from 4th century onwards to 10th century or so. and we have their graves, and there's actually literary attestation of this happening as well. But now finally we also have their graves, and we can see clearly that at one point there were a lot of people with Eastern ancestry who were there in Hungary.
Got it.
Siberian ancestry. But what happened was that somehow in moderns that ancestry does not survive. So there could be many reasons for that. One is that they were just elites and did not mingle with the people there, or maybe they did mingle, but over time they had some sort of rule of exogamy, of marrying a woman outside the whole clan or family or tribe or whatever, and all the excess Eastern Uralic ancestry got diluted away, and they became just like their neighbors.
But I feel like exogamy in many ways is not the norm in most cultures, right? The idea of marrying outside of one's tribe would seem very like not prevalent. I mean, I mean now modern time, it's like, you know, exogamy is an element, and I think that today's time is different than historic time, I would imagine. So like the idea of exogamy even in this situation would be a less possible or probable scenario.
Right. It could be that it's just elite dominance, and the elites impose their language, and their language has just stuck for like 1,000 years. It's possible.
Okay. So this is one of the few examples where this actually
it's one of the extremely few examples where you can't find a genetic connection with the language in moderns.
Right.
So if it's not there in moderns, then the second thing you need to check is if was there an ancient genetic connection. So we find that in the case of Hungary. Now, if there's no genetic connection at all, and still, then that's a big mystery, how that happened.
Right.
The solution would obviously be in sort of an elite dominance scenario, I guess, if there's no genetic connection whatsoever. For example, if all Indians started speaking English as their first language, then the most likely solution for future researchers would be that probably English converted all of them to English.
Yeah, especially if we don't have English DNA, right? Like that'd be that'd be tough to explain.
Right.
Yeah.
But exactly. But what I see is that genetics can explain most of it. The exceptions are, as I said, I have only seen one.
Okay, so now we're getting into the data about like, so continue with like this Indo-European, like, so the concern or the larger idea is that there was a group of people that spoke a particular language called Pi or Proto-Indo-European, something close to 6,000, 7,000 years ago, right? That were a tribe or a community. The major areas are usually Anatolia, or they're in Central Asia. And then obviously the outlier would be like India was probably one of the first places they thought they came from. Now it's kind of thrown out the window. For most Indo-Europeanists and geneticists in modern day, you know, there's a few that have different opinions, whether it's Shrikant Talagiri or Nicholas Kazakis. There's a few, there's a few of these people that have the idea that it comes from India. I myself am probably leaning more towards a Central Asian like viewpoint. That's where these Indo-Europeans on the whole came from. But this is also where it gets complicated about multiple migratory patterns going in and out of the region. And so do you want to spend some time talking about the prehistory there and kind of what your data is kind of showing from their origins to their movements?
Right. So the idea is, as you said, that there was a common group of people in the Neolithic times, most likely, say 6,000 BC, 5,000 BC, that time period. And from there, these people moved to various regions, and so the Indo-European language family spread. The question is, where did they spread from? Now, the two big camps are the steppe region of the Don Volga area, which is north of the Caucasus Mountains, in the Don Volga region. The second is the Eastern Anatolian homeland. Colin Renfrew and Paul Haggerty and these people are on this camp. that the initial location was this. Then there are alternate scenarios. Some say Balkan hypothesis. Some say out of India. Some say out of Iran or out of South Central Asia. There's no one on the Central Asia. I mean, do you mean Kazakhstan by Central Asia? Is that what you mean?
I just mean the general region of like maybe Northern Afghanistan, Kazakhstan.
Okay, so North Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. Yeah. I was on that camp for quite a long time. My faith in that is slightly shifting towards Armenia region for now.
Okay.
But that's still open to me. That's still open. Yeah. So these are all the hypotheses. Now the question is to connect genetic movements from these regions to where the languages are.
Right.
The first region is to connect to is Anatolia. So because that's said to be the first language to branch out, and the first attestation is said to be around 2500 BCE from Eastern Anatolia itself. I think there are some documents from that time mentioning a city called Armi, in which there are Armi. I think they found it from some site in some Syrian or I think Ibla. I think they found these documents from the city of Ibla in Syria.
Okay.
And they have some names which sound like Anatolian names.
Okay.
So this is the domain of linguists. My strength is not too much there in this field.
Sure, that's fine.
So, but I'm just telling you what I've read from the papers. So 2500 BCE, they detect the first Anatolian names. So there has to be some movement, some genetic movement into Anatolia which corresponds with this. Now, the problem for the steppe theorists is that there's no steppe DNA found from Anatolian sites. I think there are more than 150 samples now from ancient DNA samples from Anatolia ranging from 10,000 BCE onwards. But there's no steppe at the time that it should be there. But the ancestry that is there is from its east, from the Armenia-Iran region, CHG ancestry.
Interesting. So you're seeing influx of people coming from the east.
Yeah, 50%, that too, a large chunk of it.
Okay,
50%,
wow, okay.
50% DNA. The timing of that would probably be around 4500 BCE, 4000 BCE.
Okay. And this is the first group that split off. Is that what was the idea? Or this is still the core group that they would still call the core group?
So Anatolia, according to linguists, now we are venturing into the realm of the linguists.
Yes.
Anatolia is the first language to split off, and then it stops being a core language, right?
Okay.
So the idea is that it splits off, and now its development is completely independent, and the rest of the languages are now supposedly still in that core region, and the innovations in that region are still affecting all the other languages till the split off.
So, but genetically, we don't see a connection between the Anatolian people at that time with the steppe people at that time. Is that correct?
So there's no steppe ancestry in Anatolian samples.
So they couldn't have come from the steppe, is basically what we're saying.
So the idea is, yeah, because there's no steppe ancestry, the languages could not have come from steppe.
Got it.
Now here when I say steppe, I mean the lower Russia, southern Russia region,
yes.
just north of the Caucasus Mountains.
Okay.
So because there's no DNA from that region, we can say that steppe is not the PIE homeland.
Right.
Basically.
Yes.
So then what remains? What remains is either Anatolia itself is PIE, or the Armenian-Iranian ancestry which came into it carried Anatolian languages, right? So those are the two options which are remaining. The problem with the Anatolian theory is that the Anatolian ancestry, which has been there since 7,000, spread all over Western Europe around 5000 BCE. So those are known as the early European farmers, but eventually they were all removed by the steppe people from Europe.
Okay.
Plus there's the Etruscan languages and the Basque languages, which are there in Europe, which are the native languages. So Anatolian is not considered, the Anatolian ancestry is not considered to be the carriers of Proto-Indo-European, because the correlation is much higher with the steppe people, and the modern people of Europe have a lot of steppe ancestry, 60-70%.
But when's that steppe and ancestry enter into the region for modern Europeans? Do we have like a time frame?
Yeah. So let's rewind a bit. So now let's see what other regions get this Iranian Armenian sort of ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
So we have then samples from the Don Volga region starting from 5000 BCE and till the Yamnaya period, which is 3000 BC.
Mm-hmm.
So now this region also receives a lot of this Armenian, Iranian sort of ancestry, amounting to even 50% of the ancestry. So 50% is going to Anatolia as well, and as well as to steppe.
Around the same time, roughly the same time period, or
roughly
is it...
the same. Yes, it's roughly the same time period, 4000 BC, 4500 BC also. So that is the reason in the recent paper Harvard has basically said that the most likely region of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, they now call it Indo-Anatolians for some reason, but whatever. That are Armenia, Northwest Iran, that region.
Okay.
So now the steppe ancestry develops further from there, from 4000 BC. Then there's some ancestry coming in from the local farmer ancestry from Ukraine and so on, and then it finally forms the corded ware culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so corded ware culture is where the culmination of the steppe Bronze Age profile happens. Now, a very similar ancestry also travels to the east and forms the Sintashta culture of northern Kazakhstan, that region.
Right.
It's in the east, and in the west is the corded ware complex, which spreads all around Germany, Germanic lands basically, and also into Baltic lands and so on. And then
so these two are considered two separate cultures from the same origin, right? That split off and kind of are doing their own thing.
Yeah, genetically they have the same origin. In the middle of them is the Fatyanovo culture it's around Moscow, around 2700 BCE is the time frame. Even this corded ware culture is formed around 2700, 2800 BCE.
Okay.
This post dates the Yamnaya culture, which is around 3000 BCE or so. And then in France, it morphs. The similar ancestry is present. So as you go farther and farther away, you can expect the percentage of the steppe ancestry to be lower and lower and lower, right? So the lowest would in Greece, for example, and in Portugal and those
Spain.
Regions.
It's much less.
Iberian regions. And the highest is around that Baltic and Germanic lands. Right. So in France, this ancestry is associated with the Bell-Beaker complex, but that's what the name of the culture is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole region then becomes the homeland of the Indo-Europeans. That's what they say, and it looks likely because one particular ancestry having a large impact all across that region is likely to be carrying some common language which then morphs into various language families.
So that would be the origin of the Romantic languages, the Latin, Greek. Well, Greek probably is a different branch than the Latin branch anyway.
Greek is a bit different. Greek, Albanian, we can set aside, but then those would be the founders of the Balto-Slavic languages, which includes the Lithuanian, Latvian, the Slavic languages.
Correct.
Then you have the Germanic family, which is the Scandinavian and German and so on, Swiss German. And then you have the Italo-Celtic families. Celtic is now, I think, lost. I'm not too sure. But Italic is the family of the Romance languages, French and
Italian, Latin,
Spanish, Portuguese, and so on. So even there, we can figure out. So we see in Iberia, for example, the genetic effect of Roman ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe 20-30% Roman ancestry is seen post 300 CE, and then we can correlate that with the spread of the Romance family into. Before that, they were probably not speaking an Indo-European language, or maybe they were speaking some Celtic language or some local non-Indo-European language.
Right.
But so we can figure. So genetics, I think the genetic studies are very important to figure out, because the most likely scenario which has been recorded in history of language change is large-scale movements of people. Nothing comes close.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the western branch. What's going on in the eastern branch at this time?
So in the eastern branch, you have the furthest east is Tokharian, which is in Xinjiang, Tarim Basin, China. And then you have Indo-Iranians on the east, and Armenian is there. So these are the eastern. So we forgot Greek.
Yeah.
We'll cover it later. But Greek, they say now that it's straight from Yamnaya, straight, not involved with the corded ware complex or.
So they came from like basically Kazakhstan region to.
No.
Oh.
No, not Kazakhstan. From north of the Caucasus Mountains.
Okay.
From basically southern Ukraine region, Moldova, and then through the Balkans into Greece.
Okay, got it.
So not that far east, not Kazakhstan, but rather, Don Volga region.
Got it.
Basically, they say that there's a culture called steppe catacomb culture, which postdates Yamnaya. So in the region where Yamnaya was present in 3000 BC, in 2000 BC, it morphs into catacomb culture. So they are saying that instead of this whole corded ware scenario, Greek is not involved with that. Rather, it's involved directly from the origin Yamnaya region, where they probably would have spoken. So Albanian and Greek are said to be from that. I haven't studied it, so I'll just take these scholars at their word for now. Maybe once I study that aspect, I'll comment on it. So this covers the European aspect. On the east, Armenian is also said to be related to the same category.
Yeah.
So the recent paper by Lazaridis, Harvard team, they came out with their Southern Arc paper. They have a lot of Armenian samples. And you can clearly see that around 2000 BC, there's steppe ancestry coming in. And earlier it was local sort of ancestry, a mix of Iranian, CHG, and Anatolians.
Okay.
But around 2000 BC, you see 25% of steppe ancestry from the north coming down. And they say that Greek and Albanian sort of form a family. And since a similar Yamnaya sort of ancestry is rather than corded ware, as opposed to corded ware, a similar Yamnaya ancestry is found in Armenia, which is to the south of that region, as well as Greek. Then most likely that catacomb Yamnaya type ancestry is responsible for the Greco-Armeno family. So that's the hypothesis for these two languages. Now we are left with Tokharian and Indo-Iranian. We'll come to Indo-Iranian last. The Tokharians, they are only attested from 300 CE onwards. So there are some, and the documents are about Buddhism.
Right.
So, and they had a lot of Buddhist converts at that time. And the language of the document, the documents are translation works of Pali and Prakrit Buddhist manuscripts. So essentially, the scholars are trying to spread Buddhism or understand Buddhism there, and they are translating the Indian texts into their local language, which is Tokhari.
Right.
Now, it has a very late attestation, but the linguists say that the forms of the words in those documents are very archaic. And so they propose that after Anatolian, Tokharian was the second to split off.
So they're okay, understood. Okay.
So even though the attestations are late, the words themselves and their whole linguistic process and science is essentially telling them that they are an early split.
Okay.
Right. So now this region has been a mystery for long. Even now, it's not solved how the Indo-European languages got there. There are a few options for this. One is South Central Asian contact. So South Central Asia are the sites of Jetun and Tepe Anau, Namazga, Gyeoksur, and Sarazam, and so on. In countries which are now Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, that region. That region was domesticating sheep and farming since 5000 BCE or so, and it was wheat and barley was being spread to China and the steppe region from that region. So that becomes one of the possible sources of the Indo-European language there. Of course, it depends on the previous theory that the scholar wants. If they don't hold South Central Asia to be Indo-European at all, then they won't even consider this theory.
Right.
But it's still one of the candidates. The second theory is the Afanasyevo people. of 3000 BC. So these are the people who have the same ancestry as Yamnaya. But they spread all the way from South Russia to the Altai Mountains.
Okay.
With their wagons, assuming maybe they use their wagons because Yamnaya people had wagons. And so, but they don't really properly reach inside the Tarim Basin till later. Maybe they do reach some of it, but that still remains one of the possible roots of this language, because 3000 BC is still an old migration, so
Right.
it could explain old nature of this language spread. So this is the second, and the third is Andronovo-Sintashta. Post 2000 BC, especially post 1500 BC, Andronovo has a very big genetic impact on Tarim Basin, giving between 30 to 50%, even more than they gave to Indians. And then even later during the Shaka period, there's a lot of Scythians in that region as well. So these three remain the options, and the jury is still not out who actually got the languages there. It could either be South Central Asians very early in time. It could be the 3000 BC Afanasevo people, or it could be the Andronovo people, or some split off of the Andronovo people who could have gotten that ancestry there. Bear in mind that the other European languages are attested very late in time, except Greek, which is the earliest, around 12. Germanic Proto-Germanic is not attested till 400 BC, only attested in 400 BC. 400 BC.
Were they in the 400 BC? Because I think the Germanic was 400 CE, right? During the time of the Romans?
No, Germanic, some inscriptions have been found from the Hallstatt culture in Slovenia.
Okay.
Around 350 BC. Those words are deemed to be some sort of Proto-Germanic.
Okay.
And Germanic, the area of Proto-Germanic is believed to be somewhere around the Denmark and North Germany region.
Right. It's still pretty Germanic in those areas even now. Yeah. I mean, with Greek we have linear A, linear B, and so that comes in. So I mean that's the earliest one of the earliest attestations of Indo-European in the region over there.
In Europe, they're actually very late. They're fairly late. In all the other regions, they are Anatolian is the earliest, and the next attestation is of the Vedic names and everything.
Yeah, the Mitanni and also the
Mitanni region. So Tokharian is now covered. The jury is still out. I believe Andronovo could have played a role, but because now the question comes. The scholars are saying that Andronovo and Steppe people had a large impact on India.
Yeah.
Okay, but they had 2 to 3 times impact on Xinjiang. So why is Tokharian not? So how could they leave their older language Tokharian there, but they suddenly could erase everything from India?
Right. So what the argument is used in the Tokharian sense to say that language is older and it's been there for centuries or millennia and nothing changed, even though the population was deeply influenced by the Androva culture, right?
I mean, it could have been relegated to some smaller area than before.
Right.
But still, for India, they are saying they wiped everything out.
Right.
The impact there of the Andronovo people is just much larger than what we see in India.
Right. Okay. So the assumption is that Androvo people are the Indo of the Indo-Europeans, right? Like the ones that lead to Indo-Iranian and then also Tokharian.
Tokharian, the people who believe that Sintashta brought Indo-Iranian languages into India and Iran and so on, they do not believe in Sintashta or Andronovo to be Tokharian.
Okay, got it.
Because they can't.
It's just they're saying it's much older than these ones.
And they can't. Firstly, it's much older. It's not related to Indo-Iranian at all.
Yeah,
it's extremely separate. So these Tokharian and Indo-Iranian, even though they are the easternmost languages, they are not related. So Tokharian is a Kentam language, and
Satam.
This is a Satam language, and then there are many other dissimilarities as well.
Although, even Armenian which shares a lot with Sanskrit too, is I think that's a Centum language. And then but they still share some words like Shunika, and there's a bunch of words in Armenian.
There are some similarities.
Yeah.
But the linguistic scholars are now also saying that the Centum, Satam divide might just be local independent innovations.
Right. Yeah.
And not necessarily because they were part of a common people before.
Which, if that's the case, then that changed a lot of other things.
Yeah, I mean, linguists haven't been able to solve anything for 200 years, right? Till genetic scale.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we got the Tocharian people taken care of. Now we come to the Indo-Europeans or Indo-Aryans.
Yeah, Indo-Iranians, right? So for Indo-Iranians, we need to figure out. So if the PI people are Iran and Armenia and these Iranian farmers and Caucasian hunter-gatherers, that sort of ancestry, if those are PI, then India and Iran always has had a lot of this ancestry since like a long time, right? So that
because the Iranian farmer goes back 8,000, almost 9,000 years before present.
Yeah, 12,000 years ago. That ancestry is probably 15,000 years, 20,000 years ago.
In the region, just in that entire region.
I mean, just the date of that ancestry.
Yeah.
If we talk about where that ancestry was present, that's an open question till we get more samples from all the areas.
Sure.
But just the existence of that ancestry is quite old. And in India, possibly it could have been there since 10,000 BCE as well.
Right.
Possibly even older. We don't know because we don't have samples yet. But it also could have been that it came late. We'll see. When the data comes, we can figure that stuff out.
But we know it's been there since at least IVC, right? Because we find IVC, the peripheral,
in IVC,
has the Iranian farmer data.
So IVC, if you break up the ancestry in a distal fashion, distal fashion is into components which are all 10,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So it does not reflect the immediate sources of ancestry, rather very distant sources. So the IVC, the Rakhegadi woman would probably have 60% Iranian farmer related. I say related because it could have been local to India, but it's related to Iran.
Sure.
Then around 25% what they call AASI, which is the local native Indian ancestry. Which is related to the Onge, distantly related to the Onge Andamanese people.
Right.
So that covers 85%. Then about 8 to 10% Siberian ancestry, something like Tarim Basin 2000 BCE. There's a culture called, actually I forget it, I can't pronounce the Chinese name, but but in Tarim Basin you see a 2000 BCE culture with all those mummies and red hair, right? So that Tarim Basin culture, so that sort of ancestry, 10% is found in IVC as well. And then there's 5 to 7% Anatolian ancestry. So essentially, 4 components are there in the IVCP. 4 broad components. The 2 biggest are the Iranian related. The biggest is the Iranian related ancestry. So which begs the question, why can that Iranian ancestry not bring the language to India?
So my follow-up question to that would be: do we find the Iranian ancestry in other other groups of Indo-Europeans or no?
Iranian ancestry is there in all of them.
All the Indo-Europeans.
All of them.
So even the ones that are in Europe.
All of them. So Steppe itself is 50% CHG/Iran related. So the formation of the Steppe people around 4000 BCE happened because the European hunter-gatherers, who were just hunters and fishermen by that time, they had no cattle, nothing. They mated with 50% southern ancestry.
So why isn't then this seems? I mean, for me, then suddenly this seems like an open shut case. If everyone has the Iranian ancestry across the board, why isn't that considered the location of pi?
Yeah, that's exactly what Paul Hegarty was saying in his follow-up paper to that Southern Arc paper. So Paul Hegarty is from Max Planck, he's a linguist. He's saying, I see that blue component everywhere, which is CHG RAM. So why are you ignoring that? That's exactly what Paul Hegarty is saying. Even I am on that camp.
Right.
Anyway.
And no, we don't know. I mean, we might not have the exact location where that group of people came from, but we know they're scattered in like this area that's large area.
Yeah, we broadly know where it is from. We don't know exactly which site it is, but broadly we know it's from Neolithic Armenia, Neolithic Iran, and that time period. And the components of that region during that time is Iranian ancestry plus some Anatolian ancestry plus some Levantine ancestry.
Right.
Which is Levantine and Anatolian are closely related.
Right.
But broadly, these three ancestries are the only ones which are present at that time in that region. So someone with this ancestry is the progenitor of all the Indo-European languages. So that much is actually pretty clear. Even Harvard is now, Max Planck, everyone is on probably the same page.
Right.
That this ancestry, which gave 50% to Anatolia, which gave 50% to the steppe, is the PIE, but then India mein wo bhul jate hain.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone always India's on the back end here for everything.
For India, it doesn't matter. Now, there's a reason why it is so. I'll tell you that reason why Harvard for now denies that rule, and it's a wrong reason, and the reason and that also I'll explain it. So, when the seminal paper on India came out, which was Narasimha in 2019, the same day they also published Shinde et al. 2019.
Yeah.
So the Shinde paper was on Rakhi Gadi, woman, only one sample. And the other paper was on a lot of samples, including the Narasimhan paper. I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I read both.
Yeah. So in Shinde et al., so Harvard is the genetics team most likely behind the genetics aspects of that paper, and which is like 90% of the paper. In that paper, they conclude based on, so they can't really study the Rakhi Gadi sample directly because it's of very poor quality.
Okay.
Out of 1 million SNPs, they only have some 30,000. And at least 200, 300,000 are needed to form a good opinion with a high degree of certainty.
Right.
They did not study that sample directly, but they studied these Indus periphery samples, which are samples with high ASI ancestry, which they found in East Iran and BMAC.
Okay. So
what they found was that there were migrants, likely migrants from IVC at these sites of Chariots in East Iran. The date is around 3000 BC, 2500 BC, and at Gonor, which is in Turkmenistan, of the BMAC Bactria margiana culture, archaeological culture. I'll call it BMAC.
Yeah, BMAC. Everyone calls it
that. So there were 3 migrants from BMAC and 7 or 8 samples from Chariots, which have Indian ancestry, but pre-steppe period. Right. So there's no steppe ancestry there, but these 4 broad components that I talked about are all there in those samples. But the main other samples of these sites don't have that elevated ASI ancestry like Indians. So they hypothesized that these were migrants from India, which is probably true, but exactly from where in India or Pakistan or Afghanistan, we don't know.
Yeah.
We'll leave that for later. So the Shinde et al. Paper, Harvard concludes that there's no Anatolian ancestry in those.
Okay.
In those Indus periphery samples. So now what happened? And they also conclude that the Iranian ancestry in these samples is already in this region from 10,000 BC, 12,000 BC.
Okay.
So since PIE is younger than that, and this ancestry is already here, and there's no Anatolian ancestry which proves a second later movement of people, because Anatolian ancestry is everywhere in Iran by that time. By 4000 BC, 5000 BC, it's everywhere in Iran.
Yeah. So
what they're saying is that since 10,000 BC that Iranian component is there, there's no ancestry coming in from Iran, Anatolia after that. And so Indo-European languages could not have come from that region.
That doesn't seem to follow for me. No, I mean, I understand why they're saying it, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me. Because if we're saying even in the data we had originally, when we talked about the Anatolia, there was no sense that...
No, the in 4500 BCE, the ancestry which goes to Anatolia as well as steppe.
Yeah.
Right? It has some Anatolian ancestry.
Okay. It does.
It does have. So But they didn't know this for long. That is a recent finding.
Okay.
At that time, they were not. This was not the mainstream theory that Armenia or that region is the source of the PIA people. But anyway, the point is that they said that there's no external ancestry from the West coming into India, and the ancestry there is extremely old ancestry, and so there's only one now route left, that is from the north of India.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's their conclusion. But the problem is there is Anatolian ancestry in those samples. Their own paper, which is now in preprint mode, as a preprint by Harvard itself, a paper called Meyer et al. 2022. They show 5% Anatolian ancestry, and my modeling, I've been very clear that my models fail if I don't include an Anatolian source. I have to have an Anatolian source for the p values of my models to pass for those samples. So I'm 100.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Anatolian ancestry is present. Now it would have come around 4000 BC or so. The Indian samples, those Indus periphery samples, share a lot of affinity with South Central Asian samples from Tepe, Anau, Jeoksur, and so on. Okay. So there's definitely South Central Asian connection in the Indus periphery. Maybe 20-30% of that would have come from, along with that Anatolian ancestry, would have come from South Central Asia. So definitely there's Anatolian ancestry, and so that whole logic of them of Harvard completely negating that Western route into India is not sound. So that route still remains open, and their own paper also is now saying that. I heard a recent talk by David Reich. Actually, he gave both sides but did not choose one.
Right.
So. So that is one route which is open. The second is from the north, from the steppe region, Sintashta related. And the third option is local development, which would by corollary mean that India was the region which spread languages to all the other countries, right? The problem there is that we don't see that high ASI content moving around a lot outside India. We see it in Eastern Iran and BMAC regions and so on.
Right.
But it doesn't go too far from there. At least I couldn't detect it. So, now there's a problem here, which is that we don't have many samples. So maybe if 5000 BC samples come from India, maybe they won't have any ASI at all. Maybe Indians in 5000 BC did not have ASI. And maybe those samples then, because they have no ASI, become extremely good fits as sources for some other samples around the world. Or even in steppe,
right.
Even in those. So in that sense, the option remains open. But the sample that we have now with that 25-30% ASI, which is there in Indians today, that those samples are not good fits for
out of India.
For out of India.
Yeah.
So that on the probability list right now, that's weak. So I move with the data. If the data comes out, and if the samples from India fit,
right,
then out of India will again become a possibility for me. If they don't fit, they would remain a possibility.
Right. But I mean, I feel like there's a lot of areas you can kind of throw out now for the large part, unless new data comes in, like even Anatolia as being like the homeland, or even the
Eastern Anatolia is still open.
Yeah, Eastern Anatolia, but or even the high levels of the Caucasus Mountains probably are not going to be the case either, because we don't see much of that genetic data in other places. So it seems to me it kind of has to, the probability is going to be that Armenia, Iran region.
Or South Central Asia, that's still open as to me. But for me right now, Armenian region is number one in terms of the first place where it was probably spoken, just because of the genetics, actually.
And that's just pi too. That has nothing to do with like Indo-Iranian languages could come later than that, which we probably were, definitely, right? We probably see like the Mitanni culture, the Vedic culture, the culture of the Iranians is probably much later. I mean, but I don't think, I would probably put that in the 3000 BC time period. That's my guess.
Probably. Yeah. So the western route still remains open for India. The northern route has been mainstream for some time now, pushed by Harvard a lot, based on what I would say is there is a lot of faulty science.
Right.
I just gave you one example of that Anatolian thing. Now the thing is that those papers are cited a lot. Now So any such incorrect finding would basically stay for at least 10 years, if not more.
Right.
It will keep getting cited and used as a reason to deny some legitimate theory. Okay, so YT we covered. So now two options remain.
Yeah.
One is from the west and one is from the steppe region.
Mm-hmm.
There are various criteria that we can use to figure out which one of those is the correct answer. First is, of course, the Mitanni and Kassite evidence. There's definite usage of the Vedic gods and some Sanskrit names from 1600 BC onwards in Iraq and Syrian region.
Mm-hmm.
That is point number one. Point number two is probably we can say that by 1000 BC, West Iran had started speaking Western Iranian languages. So the Iranians need to have reached Western Iran, which is by 1000 BC.
Mm-hmm.
So now that also has to be connected by genes. Now, let me say first about the Mitanni evidence that it was that the people were speaking a different language, not Indo-Aryan.
Yeah.
They were speaking a Aryan language, so the contact need not be large.
Right.
Some trade would have done. Maybe
it was probably just the language used by the ruling class, like we did in India with Persian or something of that nature.
Maybe it isn't even that. That's possible, certainly, that rulers spoke a different language, but that is not a required thing. So maybe some priests went there and converted them.
Right, like we see in Thailand or
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Something like that could have happened. We don't know, but there should be some contact at least.
Right.
But okay, so that was first. Second was the Western Iran should have seen Indo-Iranian influx latest by 1000 BC, and they would have started speaking Western Iranian language by that time, because in the Assyrian records we see them come in by 900 BC at the earliest.
Mm-hmm.
So we have literary evidence of Iranians in contact with Assyrians at that time. That is the latest. They could have been there even before that.
Right.
So some scholars say by 1300 BC the Iranians would be there in West Iran, but the hard evidence is for 900 BC.
Okay. Right.
Now bear in mind we recently got some genomes, some samples from Hasanlu and Dinkha Tepe, which are in Western Iran.
Right.
At the border of Iraq. So that is point number two. Point number three is that the Rig Veda is a Bronze Age culture, so iron is not known there. So we have to look somewhere before 1200 BC, and so before 1200 BC India there is the use of iron, so we have to look before that. Now the fourth is the archaeological site should correspond with the Vedic culture. Right. The fifth is, of course, the genetic impact should be visible. And if we can figure out exactly that languages are correlating with the spread of genes with time, then we'll figure out which component is brought in the Indo-Iranian languages.
Right.
And then there's one more point, which the linguists make, is that the Uralic language family has a lot of Indo-Iranian loanwords. And those loanwords are of very archaic nature, pre-Rigvedic words. Some of them are also pre-Rigvedic. That's what they say. According to them, that means that the Uralic homeland and the Indo-Iranian homeland should be next to each other. That's the linguistic evidence which they give for Sintashta being Indo-Iranian, Proto-Indo-Iranian. And then there's also a linguistic evidence where they say that the Balto-Slavic and Indo-Iranian form a linguistic clade, that they have a common ancestor.
Yeah, but that's two different regions. Right? The Shinashta.
We'll discuss that.
But I mean, but this also the question is like, then, there's, I think you also previously talked about in one of your tweets about the cattle data, right? About the cows, the movement of cows.
I don't speak. I think that was someone else. I don't speak right much about it. Okay. But there's definite spread of cattle, the Zebu DNA around. but then, as I say, that doesn't really necessarily mean language change or anything.
No, but I mean, that
probably,
shows from movement of people, because those cattle aren't going to move by themselves in
right.
that vast swath of territory. And then we also have the issues of, things like the chariots and horses and what regions we find these things and when we find them, and it's complicated. I mean, it's not easy, but I do think that people tend to simplify it as if like there's clear evidence for one or the other, because like some places you find the horse in certain times and where you don't expect it, and then you find out in places where you're supposed to expect it, there's no horses there or no chariots.
Yeah, I mean, for India, for example, even before the supposed Indian migration, you don't find too many horses. Even after, we don't find
that's right. So now people are fighting about
some.
34 ribbed versus 36 ribbed. These like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't consider horse as some important part of the debate, actually. Me personally.
But I mean, you personally don't, but I think the linguists do.
A lot of people do.
I don't think the geneticists do as much, but the linguists do very, very strongly. Like for them, that's like one of the core pieces of their evidence.
Yeah, the linguists do, and so let's talk about the chariots at least.
Yeah,
that is
sure.
So for example, horses can be traded as well, right? You don't need to have a lot of them. In fact, if you don't have horses and you see, IBC was definitely trading with a lot of people, right? It was trading with Mesopotamians by sea. It was trading with the BMAC people. They definitely knew of horses. I mean, if someone doesn't believe that they knew horses existed, they're just deluded.
Yeah, that's right. Because I mean, if you just go up to the Gandhar region and a little further around there was a lot of horses in that time period. And in fact, like, I'm not Gandhar region, but northern Afghanistan, that's like the areas where there's a lot of horses. And we know that
Kurgan Valley is the hub. Yeah.
And we know they were not that far from there. They were mining that blue IPSA, whatever it's called. The
lapis lazuli.
Yeah, that thing, right? Which is not that far from Versana Valley, if you in relative space.
Right. So India, maybe they didn't have a lot of horses, but there are quite a lot of archaeological finds which they're saying that they found horses. But people don't believe it. Maybe I don't know why that is. I'm not an archaeologist, so I leave that aside. But even if there weren't too many horses and they were imported and they were priced commodities, then priced commodities could very well be written about a lot in poetry and this thing, right?
Which they do in Mahabharata, right? Mahabharata talks about the horses being brought from the western regions because they didn't have horses in India.
Right, exactly. So that is not if people are imagining that the Vedic land, which we know was in the Punjab Haryana region, was overflowing teeming with horses at that time, I mean, that's just not historically or logically accurate.
Right.
They are imagining the people who believe the Sintashta region to be the origin. I mean, that region was teeming with horses, and they believe that it was teeming with some sort of paradise, teeming with horses, chariots, and they have some, I don't know what sort of idea they have. But that is not necessarily the case. I mean,
did they even find wheels in the Sintashta region? They even found.
Okay. So let's talk about the chariots and the wheels.
Yeah.
So a big deal is made of the. Actually, the only reason that they connect the Sintashta culture to Indo-Iranians is because they found some horses in the graves there, and there were imprints of spoke wheels. 8 to 12 spokes, but they didn't find the full wheel, only the imprints on the dirt.
Yeah.
And maybe some associated chariot, some cheek pieces or something like that. Based on that, they believe that they had a horse and chariot culture, and they assume it to be a war chariot.
Yeah.
But it cannot be reconstructed. So what you don't know is that was it for a standing charioteer, or was it for a seated charioteer?
Right.
Was it for transport and all that? We don't know. Actually, the chariot experts, Litter and Crowell and all these people, they're actual proper chariot experts. They don't believe the Sintashta finds to be good for racing. So they consider the Near East to be the origin of the proper chariots.
The war chariots, yeah.
one thing to consider is that the date of this earliest find in the Sintashta region is 1950 BCE is a carbon date. Around the same time in 1900 BCE, you have spoke chariots in Anatolia.
Right.
At Kanesh, and you have seals of depicting spoke chariot, and they had 4 spokes. And Sintashta had 8 to 12 spokes. They don't seem connected.
Right.
They are so far away, and it's almost, I mean, that's like probably 30-50 years of difference between those 2 finds. So independent development was probably happening, and the chariot experts are basically very sold on the idea that Near East had a local development of the chariot culture.
Sure.
Simply because you see the preceding stages also in those regions. As it's not that one day you just found a Ferrari there, right? You have to go through the Maruti phase.
Yes, that's right.
So in 2300 Tepe Hisar, you find some BMAC seals with a proto crossbar chariot. So the wheels are just crossbars rather than spokes with a
right. Coming from a central location, yeah.
Right. So this BMAC culture had horses as well as proto-chariots, horse-pulled proto-chariots, which is closer to India. BMAC is closer to India than Sintashta, before Sintashta was even born as a culture.
Right.
Okay, so they had training horns. So for animal training, they used horns. Horns have been found at that south, at those sites. Bronze and gold and silver horns. Training trumpets, they call it, training trumpets. Right. Then they have horse-headed scepters in the graves. They have wagons at BMAC. So all these have been found. Chalo, India probably is not there, but BMAC is closer to India than Sintashta. So why not BMAC? So this Near East and India and Iran region probably had local development of chariots. So now let's discuss India also. We see some evidence, right? IVC script has proper chakra as a symbol.
Yeah.
Proper spoked wheel is there as a symbol. Then we have some spoked wheels, not properly spoked, but paintings of spoked wheels.
Yeah.
In some caves in Bhimbetka and MP area, there are spoked wheels, but we don't know the exact dates because cave paintings can't be dated.
Tough to accommodate, yeah.
And at Sanoli, we find proper warrior culture in around 1900 BCE with proper proper weaponry as well as the chariot, Rath, which was also probably a weapon because all other things.
But that wheel is a solid wheel.
Yeah, but I mean, it was still a warrior's weapon, right?
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. But the solid wheel tends to be much more considered bad for war chariots, right?
Yeah, but if you have a Maruti or a Ferrari, you still have a car.
Sure. Fine. I can take that.
So what I'm trying to say is that there was a warrior culture in the Vedic heartland. So the Vedic heartland is that Haryana region. In that, around the time that the people who believed that that region was already Vedic had proper chariots with warriors being buried there. So why should the people who believe that this region was Vedic, why should they? They will obviously say that this validates their finding, and they're right. So for people who said the Sintashta steppe culture is the origin, and when we found steppe ancestry in Indians, they said, "Oh, we are validated." Right? The same thing these people are also doing, and I can buy that viewpoint as well.
Yeah.
So when Sanoli, the chariot was not there, and people who were saying that those regions should already be Vedic by that time. Now, since the chariot and the warriors have been found, they obviously get a win in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty that a lot of people are still having is connecting IVC to any sort of Indo-European, right? Like, that's where the big disconnect, I think, is for a lot of the current Indo-Europeanists. There's also the movement to say that IVC is Dravidian, which I don't think it was. I mean, I'm sure Dravida languages were spoke in the region because it's like that IVC region is the biggest in the world, in the ancient world. Actually, it's bigger than all of the Middle East in terms of size for any particular group of common culture. So in that big one size of place, you can't have one language.
Yeah, that's probably true. They probably had multiple languages. Maybe some of them are now extinct as well. That's also
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
But one big clue that I strongly believe in is that the substrate nature of the Rigvedic language.
Yeah.
So if there were a lot of any other language people living in the Indus Valley and someone had come and imposed their language.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, there are a lot of farmers. So suppose there are 100,000 farmers in the region and some elites come and impose their language on them. A lot of words and grammatical nature, structure of the previous language. Now, it would at least take 100 years or something to completely convert the people into a new language, right? Farmers,
Sure.
no one is going to go to them and teach them one by one the new language, right? It takes a lot of time, and especially the peasant class is the last to convert to the new language.
Mm-hmm.
And they take a lot of the words of their original language, especially the daily words, into the new language. Right, as well as a lot of the grammatical structures which they are used to the new language.
Absolutely right.
Plus the toponyms, the names of the rivers and the places, they are very sticky and they stay for a long time.
Correct.
They don't immediately change when the language of the people changes. So you should see, if there was a lot of imposition, you should see a lot of non-Indo-Aryan language in the Rig Veda and a lot of that happening. We don't see a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in Greek, in Homer's epics, so Hainsworth had written a paper about it. All the toponyms mentioned in all of Homer's works, 60-70% are non-Indo-European in nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So which basically says that there was external language imposed on natives who spoke a different language. They are not clear because the base language of native language of Greece doesn't survive. But the etymology of that is non-Greek or non-Indo-European.
Right.
But in Rig Veda, there's not a single toponym or hydronym, which is non-Indo-European.
I think Michael Whittle makes a case for one or two.
One or two, that's it.
Yeah,
that's it. But Greek has 60-70.
Yeah. So this is, I know in the Rig Veda.
70%.
Yeah. The Rig Veda is very, very consistent with its rivers names all being Indo-European of origin.
He basically makes the case that they were forcefully converted. Witzel makes the case that the Vedic people were extremely forceful and thorough in ensuring that every last word was.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I mean, I think the Vedic people were very sure internally about the sanctity of their language and didn't change it. But I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that even today there's no, especially in the region we're talking about, the rivers, the lakes, the mountains, all are. There's no other names for it. Like here in the U.S., right? Like you go to any of these places, Mississippi, they're still non-Indo-European names for things. Like, Dakota, right? North Dakota. Those are like North is Indo-European, but Dakota is not. It's a, entirely different word. So we don't have that really in the Indian region.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why Witzel has to make this claim, right? He says that there are very clear indications of all of these words being new coinages. I think.
Yeah, I don't know how that's clear.
I'm not a linguist, so I have no idea about this. But
well, I mean, part of his claim is these were words that they took from their original homeland, right? Their original homeland in Aryabhata, wherever Aryabhata was, which is, I guess, Iran in this case. So we should see at least some ways they call it new something, right? Like new Saraswati, memories of old Saraswati or new Sindhu.
Yeah. So I mean, linguist. So like Greek, we don't have that substrate. So that is one. So Dravidian or not, Dravidian people would have interacted later, and you see Dravidian words, loan words.
Like for example, in other places like Italy, right? You still have the Etruscan language still playing a role across even the core text, like even like the Jove and Jupiter, right? It's Jove is probably the Etruscan name for the deity Minerva, and these are all like Etruscan names that were later taken by the Italians or the Latin people and used, right? So it's very interesting, but you don't really get that in the Indian context.
What my point was, not my point. I always think about this. 25% of steppe ancestry came
to India, you mean?
To India eventually in modern. In moderns,
yeah.
we have what average 15% is there.
But that's all not that 2025 is all from one like incursion, or was it been like multiple over the years?
I would say, I mean, it would have been continuous in some aspect. Maybe whatever the case may be, it would have come in 400 years at least, right?
Yeah,
maybe 100 years, 200 years. I mean, there's no guarantee about that answer, but you can assume that over 2 centuries it would have come whenever it came.
Right.
So that.
Okay.
So the point that I always keep thinking is if these people came from steppe region or whatever, we don't have a single record. So Etruscan is now extinct, but we have records.
Yeah.
Coptic in Egypt is extinct now, but liturgically in the church it's still spoken, and we have texts from older times which exist, right? There is not a single language in India which exists. Not a single, no, not even the language, not even a record of such a language exists. Forget the actual language existing and going extinct 1,000 years ago, of 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
In the earliest text, anywhere we don't find any mention of any native language at all. I mean, that's for a country as large as India. That is actually the biggest thing which always keeps eating my mind about this steppe syntax here. Is how is it possible that these people managed to eradicate languages in such a ruthless and barbarian fashion?
Right, and these were also. Go ahead.
How did it not survive on some remote mountain tops?
No, but my follow-up to that would also be like, so these BMAC and Sinishta cultures were relatively small. They weren't bigger than 5,000 or 10,000 people at once. And even if any such migration came into, say, India, you're still talking about a region with hundreds of cities or towns and villages with, you know, populations rising to tens of thousands, 20s of thousands. Like the people moving in from Sanashta or BMAC were not moving in 5,000 or 10,000 groups.
Of course not. Plus, they had to cross dangerous terrain.
Yeah, and that dangerous terrain is unknown. And I first of all, I think about the one thing that sticks to me is how would you keep the memory of making chariots alive if it takes 100 years or 150 years to move through a mountain range as a tribe, right? Because you're wandering, you're trying to figure everything out. You're coming through. How are you going to keep that culture alive? How are you going to raise the horses? How are you going to bring all this to that region? It's a very interesting idea to me. Like, it doesn't seem to fully make sense.
So that's why they changed it now. No? So what the Kurgan theory people are saying now is that it was not an invasion, just a migration, and somehow.
But even with the migration, like, unless you're like something like to create a chariot, if you don't have a manual, it's passed down from father to the son by teaching each other, right? But if you're in the mountainous regions for 100 plus years, are you teaching your children to make chariots?
Yeah, it's a good question. You obviously can't use a chariot across a mountain range, right? So I don't know. But in India, they had their own chariot culture, even though they didn't have spoke wheels. So maybe.
Sure.
So yeah. So these are the questions which always I keep asking myself. Now let's come to the genetics of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I discussed 5-6 points earlier, right? One was Western Iran, 1000 BC. Now we have samples from Metani. Sorry, not Metani. Hasanlu Tepe and Dinkha Tepe.
Yeah.
Samples are dated between 1400 BC to 700-800 BC as well, and there's no Sintashta ancestry there. Okay. Now Western Iran should have been Western Iranian speaking at Northwest Iranian speaking at that time. Yeah. All the experts agree. Now after this date, but somehow in this paper they have not addressed this question at all. There's no mention of it also. Even Kuzmina, Elena Kuzmina, she was one of the Russian authors who heavily influenced Anthony and all these people also. she believed that Indo-Iranian came from the Andronovo people. She also mentions 1000 BC is the date because you have hard data, right, from the Assyrians of people with kings with Iranian names and all that.
Sure.
There's mention, but there's no Sintashta ancestry. So earlier I said that Mitanni does not really need a lot of ancestry because it's just some names and it could have been just one priest who had done the job.
Yeah.
But for Iranians, proper speakers and kingdoms to have come there you do need genetics. Now,
but you're not finding it.
I find it which suits, which basically agrees with my theory, not that Sintashta. I find 30-40% BMAC ancestry coming in at that time.
Okay.
So BMAC ancestry is not associated with steppe in any way.
Right.
So that is Iranian and Anatolian mixture and trade with India, contact with India and so on. Local ancestry development since 4000 BC to 2000 BC. Steppe only starts properly appearing after 1500 BC in that region.
Right.
But the people moving to Western Iran are BMAC people. Okay, so this is not even mentioned in that paper, in the Southern Arc paper, because I don't know why, whatever the reason is. So for me, it validates my theory because I've always believed that BMAC to be the process of Iranization of the Indo-Iranians, and the counterpart Aryan languages to have been developing at the same time in the Indian parts.
Right. I mean,
and there's a lot of independent archaeological evidence by other archaeologists, big archaeologists, who maintain that BMAC was Iranian because there are a lot of aspects of it which are Indo-Iranian. For example, horses, wagons, proto-chariots, horse-headed scepters,
right,
fire worship, fire temples, the dragon motif, the eagle motif, and so on. So for Victor Saryanidhi, who excavated all the BMAC sites, he strongly believes BMAC to already have been Iranian. Then there's Hebert, then Kurochkin, lots of other scholars who believe that BMAC was already Indo-Iranian since 3000 BC and later. So this theory, so every paper or every for example, let's just take the Hassandu data. Now they should at least have two theories to compare. You can't publish a paper which doesn't test the opposite theory.
Right.
Or even mention it. So what they do in that paper is they assume that Sintashta is Indo-Iranian. That's it.
They assume Sintashta is Indo-Iranian.
Yeah, they assume that. That's it. That's their starting point. So this question of how did the Western Iranian languages reach Western Iran is not even addressed in that paper. And the reason they choose Sintashta already in this paper, the reason that they give is because Uralic languages have Indo-Iranian loan words. So we choose that. So definitely Sintashta culture is Indo-Iranian. Basically.
But Sintashta is also later than BMAC, right?
Slightly later.
Slightly later, okay.
300 years later.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, but
the Hassandu samples are from 1200, 1300.
Okay. Okay, so interesting. So if then what's your status on BMAC being that region also being maybe where Indo-European on the whole pie comes from?
That was what my theory was. South Central Asia to be the Indo-European homeland since 4000, 5000 BC.
Okay.
Now we don't have the earliest sample from that region is 3600 BC. Now what I'm lacking is samples from this region. Right. India, Iran, South Central Asia, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. Afghanistan is also samples are sorely lacking.
Yeah.
What I really want are 6000, 7000, 8000, 5000 BC samples from all. Because it becomes hard to prove it to someone that this ancestry is present if the samples that you're choosing as a source are younger than the samples that you're testing.
So how's your analysis and your data been reacted to by other people that do genetics or scholars or anything like that?
So I have shared. In the Indian space, I don't get by the opposition camp. So I basically put out a lot of analysis which goes against the Syntashta theory, but which says that Indo-Iranians were probably present in this region since before 2000 BC at least.
Mhm.
And I don't get a lot of opposition to it because I don't know why, but I call them to rebut me. Recently, there have been some rebuttals which I have also responded to. But usually I don't get a lot of them. For this Southern Arc paper, actually, I had tagged a lot of people of the opposite camp to please look at my work and online, of course, not in a scholarly domain, to rebut it with their own analysis. But I don't get much of it. So for the northwestern Iranian part, so it's very clear there's no Syntashta ancestry. The paper itself says there's no Syntashta ancestry.
Right.
It's not me who's saying it. The authors themselves say it, but then they don't address the question of how that region became Iranian speaking. Because the Iranian should be there. You can't change your archaeological data because the genetics doesn't suit you,
right? Right.
Your earlier theory of every archaeological professional was that that region should have been Iranian speaking by that time. Now, because Syntashta is not there, it's why should you not address that question at all? I mean, because it goes against them. So that's why.
Right.
And Mitanni evidence is also not
contested
used in that paper at all. So they changed the goalpost shifted completely. So earlier, every paper used to state that the benchmark for Indo-Iranian is Mitanni, because that's a hard date. Now they shifted to the Ural Mountains, which is a very soft. It's a very soft date because you can't date linguistic phenomena.
Right.
Properly, especially when you are reconstructing Proto-Uralic from some modern Uralic languages, Finnish and so on. Finnish, Sami, and all these languages. You are reconstructing it, and then they find some Indo-Iranian word which is there in multiple languages. Then they reconstruct.
But Uralic isn't even an Indo-European language.
Yeah, Uralic is not.
Yeah.
So what they're saying is that Uralic homeland is near the Ural Mountains. Syntashta is near the Ural Mountains. Syntashta were Indo-Iranians, Proto-Indo-Iranians.
Yeah.
So they gave some words to, because they were an elite culture of the stud people. They gave loan words to Uralic languages, and the Uralic homeland, these people spread.
Yeah, but like we don't have attestation from Uralic languages going back to even close to that time period. From my knowledge,
we don't have hard data.
Yeah, even our attestations are relatively late in history.
Exactly.
So, but the thing is, then it could have happened.
Is that
it could have happened any time in 2,000 years, right? You could have had even a fringe group of Indo-Iranians sitting there that shared it, but they weren't even part of the main Indo-Iranian group. I mean, there's so many ideas
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
That was exactly my point, and this point has been raised by other scholars also. And what you just said is even more probable, because there are no Uralic loanwords in Indo.
Yeah. So they're separated by time and distance. At least, at least the centers of where these languages were. Their periphery is fine, but the centers seem.
Exactly. Plus, say a small group of people from South Central Asia, from BMAC, for example, went there, or even before that, they went to the Uralic lands, and they probably had some very archaic language, which is now extinct because we don't know if they existed. And they could have given some very old words there. We don't know. I mean, this is what I call soft data. They have replaced the benchmark as Mitanni, which is very hard carbonated evidence, to something which is so soft.
I mean, I think the Mitanni is probably the oldest attestation in hard data of any Indo-European.
Except Anatolian. Anatolian documents are there.
Yeah.
The Ibla documents probably have Anatolian names from 2500 BC.
Wow. Okay.
Some of the names have the proper names, proper nouns, have the characteristics of Anatolian.
Very interesting.
So second maybe, but yeah. So these are the sorts of evidences which they. So now once they declared it that Syntashta was a Proto-Indo-Iranian, then their job is done. Then they didn't test anything at all. They didn't even test Indian ancestry in those samples. There are a couple of samples at Hasanlu with Indian ancestry, IVC related ancestry.
They didn't test it as well.
They didn't even test it. They said that yeah, it's in a one line they said we didn't test it. That's it.
Interesting. I mean, I would imagine you want to test as much data as you can to see if there's like problems in your larger data set.
What has happened is that at least the people at Harvard, they have completely made up their mind that Sintashta is Indo-Iranian based on Indian Sintashta-related ancestry in Indians, presence of R1A in India. That seals the case for them. That this is the only thing, and now we don't need to spend too much brain power on this.
Yeah.
That's how I think it is. They don't get into the nuances of anything, and I there are a lot of nuances about India, which I think probably the only thing, one of the biggest things which is left for us to discuss, and maybe we can discuss that.
Sure, let's do it.
So these are the two big things. Basically, we Indians have Sintashta related ancestry, which came in at some point. Let's figure out when it came in. And we have R1A in our Y haplogroups, which maybe 25 to 30% of all Indians, frequency 25 to 30% in India.
Yeah.
Now, R1A was also found at Sintashta. So that's a direct relation. So essentially what they're saying is that 30% of Indians are descended from the Sintashta people. And autosomal ancestry is also present in large chunk. So that's all the connection that they need.
And that's Indo-European right there, the Indo-Aryans right there.
Yeah, that's it. That's the broad this thing, and it's very appealing, right? It's extremely appealing. When you think about it from a very broad level and you put it like that, it's matter solved feeling. Great. Now the problem here, there are a lot of problems here. Firstly, that R1A in India is R1A L657, which is a brother clade of R1A Z2124. Now Z2124 is the one which is found in Sintashta, all these Sintashta sites. The Indian one and the Z2124, they have a common ancestor, probably also from Steppe. Okay, but there's not a single L657 sample in all the Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, all these Russia. There's not a single L657 ancient sample found, and that L657 is the parent of 70-75% of all Indian R1A, which is about 25% of India. Okay. So when they say that there was a male migration. So for example, if you read Narasimhan, he puts India has R1A Z93, which is from the steppe region. So there's male mediated migration. But the problem is, if you look at the details are these. Okay. L657, the date of birth is 2200 BCE. This is before they themselves claim that the Aryans invaded India.
So they're saying that L657 was in India at 2200 BC already. They
are saying that they don't even talk about L657 because it doesn't suit their case.
Oh, okay. You're talking about that.
Yeah, they talk about Z93. So Z93 Z94 gave birth to two children. So two Z93 people independently developed separate mutations. One became Z24, one became L657.
Okay. And L657 is in India?
L657 is only found in India.
And what's the other one? Where's the other one found?
It's there in all the steppe region sites. Even the ancient DNA is there.
Okay. So,
but this Z2124, which is there in Sintashta and I don't know, only 5% of Indians descend from it.
I see. Okay.
Minute. There is evidence of that contact, but it's minute.
Right.
So the direct. Now we have 200 male samples, even more male samples from that region. If L657, whose birth is around 2200 BCE, and we have samples from 2200 to 1000 BC from that, not a single sample has that mutation.
So what would you conclude? It doesn't come from there.
Yeah, it doesn't come from there, right? Even if their parent would have been there, that's okay.
Yeah.
But that parent came to India and India developed into L657. Right?
Yeah. So whoever it was that brought that gene into India wasn't from there, but was from the common parent of that.
Yeah, maybe the common parent would have been there. That's fine.
Yeah.
There's a nuance here. See, the mutation can only develop in one person.
Yeah.
because these are random mutations and you can't have the same phenomenon happening randomly in two people, the exact same mutations. Okay. So the mutation happened in one person. And all the people who are positive for L657 around the world are essentially grandchildren, great-grandchildren of that one person.
Right.
Now, this L657 is not found in any ancient sample from the north. Or their frequency, there are some L657 in Uyghurs and all that, but that is probably due to later Buddhist era migration from India.
Right.
There are a lot of Buddhist scholars.
On the Silk Route, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so there is not a single population in the world apart from the Indian subcontinent which has a higher frequency of L657 than 1%. India has 25%. There is not a single population in the world. Maybe the Roma Indian gypsies.
Yeah, because they came from there. Yeah.
Because they came from India. But apart from that, there's not a single modern population. Forget ancient samples, but so then you have to conclude that even if wherever they came from, the L657 was born, the mutation was born in India itself.
Yeah.
So, and to one person who eventually succeeded for someone.
Right.
Right. So there was no mass migration of these R1A.
It was just one dude.
It was just one dude around 2500 BCE who became very successful. His children became very successful for some reason, which we don't
He could have
know.
been a trader. He could have been a king. He could have been many different things. We have no idea. So this isn't like, so again, this is like interesting because,
so this is,
you know, because
L657 is not discussed at all in Narasimhan's.
But this is where it's interesting because like, if there was a group of people that came from that region, right? You would imagine a group of those would have procreated. So you would see their genetics of the other side of not L657. You would see the other side also in India, but you don't.
We see 5% of Z2124.
Yeah.
Which is definitely from the steppe, which is definitely from there because Centashta, most of the samples are there.
But we don't know what time period that is either, right?
So we know 2000 BC, 1900 BC samples from that region and onwards are Z212.
Okay.
Even the Scythians are Z212.
Okay.
So that whole region had a lot of that Z2124 thing happening, but there was not a single L657 found until 100 BC China. Buddhist.
Wow. Okay.
But interestingly, the Rupkund, we had 23 samples found from 800 CE.
Yeah.
They probably died as part of some pilgrimage there. And out of those 23, I think 12 are males. And only 2 have R1A. And they are random people with random, they are random people. They are not related to each other.
Interesting.
They somehow ended up dying together. Maybe hailstorm, or maybe they were there for some tapasya.
Were they all Indian?
These were all Indian.
But only 2 of them had R1.
Only one of them had R1A, one had R1A L657. And these 2 are the ones with the least to no steppe ancestry.
Interesting. So you had, can you explain that again? Because R1A is steppe ancestry, is it not?
So steppe people,
yeah,
were 100%. So Sintashta people were 100% R1A Z2124.
Okay.
L657 is the cousin.
Yeah.
They share the same ancestor.
Yeah.
This is actually just anecdotal, but it's interesting because it was a random data set. So what we found at Rupkund were not related people of some one caste.
Yeah.
They have very varied ancestry from Pakistani maybe to Jat to maybe some South Indian tribal to some Andhra person, some Gujarati.
Yeah.
So their DNA corresponds with various kinds of people in India. They were not related. But of all the males, the only 2 R1A people had no steppe ancestry. Isn't that strange? I mean, it's just an anecdote. It's not a.
Yeah, that is very strange. I'm not able to square that circle.
Exactly. So with time, Y haplogroups and autosomal ancestry need not correlate. They break away.
Yeah.
For example, if there is 100 people and 25% of R1A Z2124 today, you probably won't find those 25 people to have higher steppe autosomal ancestry than the other.
Yeah.
It all stabilizes with time and the correlations also break away. Plus there are founder effects, small group of population spreading, having a lot of children and
right.
the frequency increases of that particular haplogroup, and lots of things can happen in the 3,000 years, 4,000 years. So L657 is one, you don't find it outside of India, really, in any appreciable quantity. Secondly, what I'm finding is that the steppe autosomal ancestry enters India only post 1000 BC.
Okay. So that means that there was another sort of influx of people post 1000 BC.
Yeah, and these would be the Iranians, the Proto-Shaka people. Or
The Shaka, yeah.
Some say that Cambodge people were there, or maybe these are what the Greeks call the Massagete.
Yeah, okay.
So what I'm finding is that while modeling modern Indians, when I give them a choice of steppe source, they end up choosing a very late source, which is mixed with BMAC ancestry, which was present in Turkmenistan Iron Age around 900 BCE. Also, I find another sample which fits is one from Swat Valley, 900 BCE.
Okay.
So all these are very late samples.
Yeah, very relatively late, yeah.
And what I find from their admixture dating, and this has been concluded in some 2013 paper also, is that the dating of all these Brahmin, Kshatriya, all these high steppe groups, I even modeled Roar and Jat and Gujjar, Cambodge, is around 800 BCE to 0 CE, is the date of the admixture between steppe autosomal ancestry and local ancestry.
Interesting.
So what I'm trying to say is that they don't have enough samples, but they shouldn't be making big conclusions without those samples.
Right. No, that makes sense. It makes absolute sense, right?
The main problem is that when I ask the opposite camp, so there's a lot of archaeological and literary evidence to suggest Iranian contact with Indians.
Right, of course, yeah.
Starting from 900 BC, actually. So Hemphill, for example, was an archaeologist, anthropologist. He said that in Punjab, the only break and change in the skeletal record is between 800 BCE and 200 BCE. So craniometry, dental morphology, things like that, which I don't understand. So he says that the skulls basically change only post 800 BCE and between 200 BCE. This was in 1991. Now, my admixture dating is giving me the same results as what he's saying. Plus, when I do QPADM, which chooses the best source amongst all options, etc., it is also giving me 900 BC samples as the choice.
The influx of the Iranians into the region, basically the Proto-Shakas.
Exactly. So if you read V.S. Agarwal's book, he was a very old scholar, 1950 times. He has written about the India as Panini soil.
Yeah.
In that, he writes that Panini has noted a lot of names in Punjab, in the Bannu region and Ushinara country. Panini wrote about town names with the suffix Kant, like similar to Samarkand, Tashkent.
Yeah, Rupkand.
these all are Shaka suffixes.
Yeah.
So V.S. Agarwala made the conclusion that there were probably Iranians living even before Panini's time. So Panini is 500 BCE.
Yeah, Irani talks about Shaka names in that region. Yeah.
So now, when I asked the people on the Kurganist camp, he gave me one archaeological evidence for why there were steppe Aryans present in Haryana around 1500 BC. They can't give me any.
Yeah.
They don't have it. Some very vague connections with BMAC and so on. So there's no archaeological evidence to suggest 1500 BC date of any Aryans or any Aryan entry into India at all.
Right.
If some people imposed culture and language, you should see it in the archaeological record.
Yeah, I agree.
There's probably no other example in the world where they still stick to a theory where there's no archaeological evidence.
Yeah, I mean, but this is like, I guess, like, well, this is the thing I think many Indian people have been arguing for is why is this still given any sort of credence at this level? This date, it just for some reason it seems to be fixed in everyone's mind for about 150 years, right? It just fixed. Everyone's obsessed with 1500 BCE.
Yeah, they are obsessed with 1500 BC. That's true.
And I'm just very confused on that date, because I just, like, even in my own readings, I have no sense of why that date from 1500 to 1200 BCE is important anywhere. And I think it's just I think my only guess, and it's just a stupid conjecture, is they're connecting it to the Bronze Age that goes on in Western Anatolia, and also like the Troy, and to the Mycenaean culture, and then maybe even at that time the Abrahamic cultures of development, and that's their reason for saying this is when they all developed at this time period. There's global turmoil or some nonsense.
That was one part of it, yeah, because that period was a warlike period.
Yes.
In West Asia also, and the other reason is that they saw some semblance of steppe culture moving south from that region into the BMAC area, but the evidence ends sort of in South Central Asia. It doesn't go further down into India.
Yeah.
But they still said ki this is the best bet that they have. The people who wanted that theory still, that was the best bet. So based on those dates of that steppe movement southwards into South Central Asia, they just extended ki matlab somehow or the other they must have reached.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somehow or the
yeah. I mean, this has been great, Ashish. We do have to jump off shortly, but your time is wonderful. Is there anything else you want to like touch upon before we jump off?
No, I think I've covered most of it. What I wanted to just tell any viewer that who might have been watching is that the genetic evidence is, especially the papers by Narasimhan et al. And the recent papers, they don't have any conclusive evidence in terms, they don't have actual samples. So there's very old samples and there's modern data. There's nothing in between.
Right.
So any inference that they make is always liable to change based on the actual samples coming from various time periods. And there is very good possibility of the steppe ancestry entering India post 1000 BCE, in which case the question of them giving Vedic culture and language just doesn't arise, because it can't be that young. So they should just wait for the new data to come, and especially hope that Government of India or someone puts in enough money and effort for such research and excavations to continue. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. So I think it's awesome the work you're doing. It's really interesting because I think you're offering a lot to other people to play with the data and see what your information is. So if people want to follow you, where can they follow you, and how do they get in touch with you?
So I'm only available on Twitter at agenetics1, @agenetics1. And I have my blog on which people can read and comment. That's also called a-genetics@blogspot.com. So
I'll put that into the show notes and into so that everyone can click on it and check you out. So Ashish, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time and the hard work you're doing at this. It's not easy to understand an entire new field of inquiry, and you've done a great job at it, where I think you've been engaging with people with masters and PhDs at a level at their own level, and where they actually do respect you, which is tough, right? I don't think you've had a lot of people deride your work as being amateurish. So that's really cool.
Right. I hope so. Basically, what I try to do is to make it so battle-proof that I don't give silly opinions or silly claims which I can't back up.
Yeah.
So unless I'm extremely 100% sure that what I'm saying is extremely difficult to deny or rebut.
Yeah.
I don't present it at all. So, so I'm not there for sensationalism or anything. I'm just deeply interested, and I just want the truth to come out. And as more data comes out, people will analyze the data more and more. And just because some ancestry is present somewhere does not really mean that that ancestry caused some large change. People should also remember that. The amount of it matters a lot, and the sociopolitics matters a lot.
Of course.
So that's about it. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh man, absolutely. This has been great. I really appreciate it. So we'll try to have you on some other time to talk to a few other people on this stuff. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I would love to have some sort of debate.
I don't do debates. I do discussions, because I think discussions are much easier than debates, because debates, everyone's goal is to win, and it's not to actually learn from each other. I'd rather do something about where we do a discussion on issues where we can agree and disagree and find places of common inquiry.
Right.
Yeah.
But we do have battles. I've had a lot. So what? I've been battle tested by European racists, basically.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure I've seen that. Yeah, there's a lot of European racists that come out the door with nonsense.
I mean, okay, maybe calling them racists might be going a bit too far, but let's just say Eurocentrists. So my initial years have been battle tested with these people.
Yeah.
So
no, I get that.
It gets heated at some points. It's
because people's identities are all about this, and if you're more concerned about identity than truth, I think there's a problem. And so I do think, and that's where discussion or dialogue is much more important than debate, because debate doesn't care about truth, about rhetoric and how to win, right? So, well, thanks, Ashish. We'll touch base soon. And thank you everyone for watching and listening to this episode of the Mirror Media Podcast. Follow Ashish and check out his blog.
Gayati Vanamali Maduram Gayati Vanamali